Good morning, and welcome to the virtual worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls. I'm the Reverend Kevin Carson, and I'm coming to you today from our sanctuary, joined by Vic Allen, who is providing the essential technical support for our live streaming. We are, as always, thankful for the beautiful music provided by Jessica Kuipers for this service. We welcome you, whoever you are, wherever you find yourself on your spiritual journey. We invite you into our supportive community of spiritual seekers trying to find truth and meaning in this wild and wonderful world. Ours is a faith of questioning and exploration, and we hope you will find yourself welcome too. We have a few announcements this morning. First, let me remind you that we will be sharing our joys, sorrows, and concerns a little later in the service. So if you would like to have yours read, please enter it into the chat box soon. Also, please indicate whether it is a joy, sorrow, or concern. Let me also remind you that though we will not have a time for a collection in our virtual service this morning, your donations are still important to sustaining the mission of this congregation. If you would like to donate, you can donate online through the website at idahofallsuu.org, or you can mail a check to the address also found on the website. After our service today, around 12:30, we're having a picnic in the Peace Garden outside. It is a little chilly, but not too bad for October. If you'd like to join us, please bring a chair and your own food and drink. I have also an announcement from Nancy Frank about after the picnic. She says, if anyone would like to help plant clump daisies and perennial dianthus in the Peace Garden after we finish lunch, please bring along some gardening gear and your landscaping design expertise. We will bring our small RV and tools. You are welcome to change clothes there or have some hot coffee as you get in out of the rain. Hopefully we won't have any rain this afternoon. I have received several replies about my upcoming class on the parables, and if you're interested in joining us in person or online, please see the details in the weekly email or contact me for more information at minister@idahofallsuu.org. I will send out the confirmed dates and details very soon. And finally, while no official decision has been made yet on the date for reopening our services for in-person worship, some of the COVID indicators in our area are trending in the right direction. Our reopening task force has been meeting to establish a plan, and we are hoping to resume services in November. Please stay tuned for an official announcement in the coming weeks. I invite you now to relax and enjoy a few deep breaths as we enter ourselves and center ourselves for our sacred time of worship. As I ring the peace bowl 3 times, let the sound still the noise of ordinary life for a little while as we celebrate this day together. Though we are not together in person, it is important that we remind ourselves of our covenant. I invite you now to read it aloud in your home as I read it here. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Before we light our chalice this morning with words from a Navajo chant, let us honor Indigenous Peoples Day with a land acknowledgement. The land we are on is the ancestral land of the Shoshone and Bannock people, and the many other tribes who have lived and hunted on this land for thousands of years before them. All of America was once Indian land, and today we honor the Native American peoples who came before us. The mountains, I become part of it. The herbs, the fir tree, I become part of it. The morning mist, the clouds, the gathering waters, I become part of it. The wilderness, the dewdrops, the pollen, I become part of it. Our call to worship this morning is an Ojibwe prayer from the book Earth Prayers. Grandfather, look at our brokenness. We know that in all creation, only the human family has strayed from the sacred way. We know that we are the ones who are divided, and we are the ones who must come back together to walk in the sacred way. Grandfather, Sacred One, teach us love, compassion, and honor, that we may heal the earth and heal each other. I invite you to join in our opening hymn this morning, number 38, Morning Has Broken.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word. Sweet the rain's new sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, sprung in completeness where God's feet pass. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light, Eden saw play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day.
This morning, we are featuring 6 short videos that tell Native American origin stories from several nations. I'll speak about them more in my sermon. The first 2 are from the Ojibwe and Haudenosaunee nations.
The following is a recounting of the creation story of Sky Woman and Turtle Island, the inspiration for this piece of artwork. This rendition is based on Basil Johnson's storytelling in his book Ojibwe Heritage. Long, long ago, Gitche Manitou, the Great Spirit had a vision. He dreamt of sky, stars, sun and moon, and an earth filled with vegetation and animal beings that walked, crawled, flew, and swam. He dreamt about mountains and valleys and a variety of landscapes, lakes and oceans, and felt a range of emotions. He understood that he needed to create what he saw in his vision. From nothing, he created rock, water, wind, and fire, breathing life into each and bestowing them with different powers and spirits. He then set out to populate the earth with different beings, including plants, two-leggeds, four-leggeds, winged ones, and swimming ones. Lastly, he made man. They were the weakest of all beings, but were given the extraordinary power to dream. Finally, Gitchi-Manitou put in place the great laws of nature to create an orderly existence and harmony in the universe and earth. Unfortunately, a great disaster fell upon the earth, leading to the deaths of all men and land creatures. For many generations, the world became a vast ocean, and only the water creatures survived. Eventually, however, the earth ceased to be such a hostile environment. At that time, a spirit woman named Sky Woman resided in the heavens. She lived in solitude, but grew tired of her loneliness. She asked Gitchi-Manitou for reprieve from her loneliness, and he sent another spirit being to become her partner. Sky Woman conceived twins, but her partner left before they were born. One child was a spirit, while the other was a physical being. Her children, who were opposite in nature, destroyed each other in a grand battle, and Sky Woman was once again alone. Gitchi-Manitou once again sent her another spirit to be her partner. She again fell pregnant, but again her partner left prior to the birth of their children. The water creatures below had witnessed what had happened to Sky Woman and invited her to take refuge upon the back of a giant turtle, since the world was covered in water. A pregnant Sky Woman agreed and descended from above to rest on the turtle's back. She asked the water creatures to retrieve some soil from the bottom of the ocean to place on the turtle's back. Many animals tried and failed, nearly drowning in the process, including the beaver, the fisher, the marten, and the loon. Finally, little Muskrat offered to try. There was great doubt amongst the creatures that Muskrat could succeed where they had failed. Muskrat dove to the bottom of the ocean. The other creatures began to worry as time passed. Eventually, little Muskrat floated up to the surface, grasping some soil from the bottom of the ocean. As Muskrat was revived, Sky Woman painted the rim of the turtle's shell with soil and breathed life into it. The soil began to expand across the turtle's shell, forming an island, which we now know as Turtle Island, or North America. The waters began to subside, and Sky Woman's island home grew larger. The animal beings brought her plants, and she breathed life into these and revived creatures that had previously drowned. She was a life giver. Eventually, she gave birth to fraternal twins, a girl and a boy. Unlike her firstborn children, these two children were comprised of both physical substance and a soul-spirit substance, but were still different in gender, although they were complementary to one another. These men and women made up the first Anishinaabe.
This is the Haudenosaunee creation story of Sky Woman, who fell from the unseen world and landed on Turtle Island. Long before the world was created, there was an island in the sky inhabited by sky people. One day, a pregnant Sky Woman dropped through a hole created by an uprooted tree and began to fall for what seemed like eternity. Coming out of darkness, she eventually saw the oceans. The animals from this world congregated, trying to understand what they saw in the sky. A flock of birds was sent to help her. The birds caught her and gently guided her down onto the back of a great turtle. The water animals, like otter and beaver, brought mud from the bottom of the ocean and placed it on Turtle's back until solid earth began to form and increase in size. Turtle's back became Sky Woman's home, and the plants she brought down with her from Sky World were her medicine. She made a life for herself and became the mother of Haudenosaunee life as we know it today.
Our reading this morning is a Tiwa Pueblo prayer from the book Earth Prayers. O our Mother, the earth, O our Father, the sky, your children are we, and with tired backs we bring you gifts that you love. Then weave for us a garment of brightness. May the warp be the white light of morning. May the weft be the red light of evening. May the fringes be the falling rain. May the border be the standing rainbow. Thus weave for us a garment of brightness, that we may walk fittingly where grass is green. O our Mother the earth, O our Father the sky. Our next two videos are from the Hopi and Inuit peoples.
Sinom asmoti at kaveye siwa. Pu'nawa sinom omi katihep ya. Haki masawe au iki, pa masao yan matiwa. Masao amumi pangkau, itit ko habi makiwa. Sinom happy it dit squat au past nat yao yung ni. Tuwa na sabi, yep, mga maskya yota. Ni kyang nanan iwok nan kusani. Pan itit kwat ang nenengem kuktotani. Pan tewa na sabit au ikini.
In their origin story, after they emerge from the earth, the Pueblo are given a sacred quest. Find the center place.
So some clans went clockwise and some clans went counterclockwise. And as the clans migrated, they placed an insignia where they were at that particular time and place, which is a spiral.
Ove yao hima matak dini masao kita. Pan na naptani tewa na sabe ike. Pam mi matak tik pang happy yesvani. yep happy I tuwana sabi.
Chaco was a place where people came together from vast distances.
Chaco was a culmination of many years of learning and knowledge and perfecting their ceremonies.
People share knowledge and beliefs based on thousands of years of observing their world. Ceremonies to influence the very forces of nature. They are still practiced today.
Raven made the world and the waters with beats of his wings. He had the powers of both a man and bird, and could change from one to the other simply by pulling his beak over his head as one lifts up a mask. His earth was dark and silent. He had created water and mountains, and had filled the land with growing pea-pod plants. After 5 days, one of the pea-pods burst open. Out popped a fully grown man, the first to walk on Raven's new earth. At first, the man was dizzy and confused. He drank from a pool of water at his feet, which made him feel a little better. Raven had been soaring above his earth when he caught sight of the movement below. For a long time, Raven and the man stared at each other without saying a word. Finally, Raven spoke. "Who are you, and where did you come from?" "I was born from that pea-pod," replied the man, pointing to the plant. Raven was astonished. He had made the pea plant himself, without any idea that something like this would happen. However, he was pleased that his earth would now have inhabitants. "Have you eaten?" asked Raven. "I've had a drink of water," replied the man. "Wait here for me," said Raven, who lowered his beak and took the form of a bird. With a flurry of dark feathers, he flew off into the night sky. The man waited for Raven for 4 days. Raven returned, carrying 2 raspberries and 2 heathberries. "These are for you. They shall grow all over the earth to feed you." Man devoured the berries in one gulp. Raven realized that berries alone wouldn't be enough to feed his hungry creation. Raven then began working clay to form 2 fat mountain sheep. When he waved his black wings over them, the sheep sprang into life and bounded into the hills. He made more and more sheep. Man looked at them so hungrily that Raven carefully placed them far up in the mountains so that man wouldn't eat all of them at once. Raven went on making fish, birds, and other animals, and waved his wings over each one to bring it to life. Each one he put someplace out of man's reach so that he wouldn't kill them all, the fish in the rivers and the birds in the air. Already, Raven could see other men growing in pea pods, and they were soon going to emerge hungry too. Raven created a huge bear from the same clay to make sure man had something to fear. After a few days, Raven noticed that man was lonely. Raven went off to a quiet corner in the earth where man couldn't see what he was doing. He started building a figure out of clay. It looked like man, but was smaller and softer. Raven brushed his wings over the new figure, and the lovely being sat up and looked at man. "This is woman, your helper and companion," said Raven. Man was very pleased. Together they filled the earth with their children, and before long Raven's earth filled with the sound of many voices and overflowed with many forms of life.
At this time, it is our practice to share the joys, sorrows, concerns, and milestones that mark our lives together. As we read aloud your submissions, I will light a candle to honor them. I will begin with a concern for myself, for the wolves of Yellowstone who are being killed if they stray outside of the park boundary because of new hunting regulations in Idaho and Montana. May they forgive us. I think we have some in the chat.
Yep. Victoria McDonald has a concern for a neighbor who is their 61-year-old daughter is recovering from a perforated appendix, and she is slowly improving. Two joys from Ron Goen this morning. Outstanding virtual symphony last night, plus a great Met presentation of Boris Godunov's at the Edwards Theater yesterday. And that's all we have in the chat box this morning.
All right. We light one last candle now to mark the joys, sorrows, and concerns that remain unspoken but in our hearts. Our final two videos are from the Navajo and Cherokee nations.
Before this world existed, the first world lay in darkness and emptiness with the exception of 6 beings. They were First Man, First Woman, Salt Woman, Fire God, Coyote, and Begochitty, the child of the sun. Begochitty first created 4 mountains, white in the east, blue in the south, yellow in the west, and black in the north. But there was still no light. The first beings grew tired of this and decided to leave the first world. At the center of the first world, Begochitty planted an enormous seed, which grew into a tall, hollow reed. He then gathered all his creations and crawled inside. The reed grew out of the first world and into the second. The second world was light and blue. When the first beings emerged from the reed, they found a nicer place to live, but it was already occupied by the cat people. The first beings and the cat people fought for years and years. But in the end, they couldn't overcome their differences. Again, Begochitty collected his beings and returned to the hollow reed. The reed grew on and on into the third world. The third world was yellow, beautiful, and full of light. The first beings rejoiced and built camps and had many children. Begochitty created rivers and lakes and mountains and all kinds of animals and birds. The first men and women lived there happily. One day, as Coyote was walking along the river, he found a baby, the child of the water monster of the third world. Coyote stole the baby and hid him under his blanket. When the water monster discovered his son was missing, he was furious. He sent vast rainstorms from all directions and flooded the third world. Begochitty and his creations ran back to the hollow reed to escape and forced Coyote to give back the baby. But it was too late. The third world was entirely flooded. Finally, the waters rose to the base of the fourth world. Locust helped to carve a hole into the next world, and all of Begochitty's creations crawled out to set up their houses again. Begochitty created mountains and set the moon, sun, and stars in the sky. This world was not as beautiful as the third, but it became the home of the Navajos. Begochitty taught men and women the right way to live, how to plant corn, squash, and beans, and how to give thanks for their harvests.
Juna the land nahi. Sagwun jalaki udawlana kano heski. Ana the diskan go higitsigesa. Nahna ani jalaki aniya we aneha. Nahna usti udawlasa kado uganawa naskin nogwa jiki amayeli. Ale aneha usti kada udawlasa ulenaha kado altela heska ale kado ajila ataskiska ulena he. Yadana nikatu iyuna dalka gesa una nikisa chi yui. uni wataha ije unena sai. Naskano aniyawe unanaki se. Ugota gesa amaye anege ilaski iyuna tota kwasta. Tlanoane kata chiyu yiduk tala se naskitikani yeket tiwaktidana anai sai. Naskano kalwoge chiyu amaya jedonhi tutlanohiye wunilu cha amayulti nanoalkana kadohi wunilu chei. Hea unadalka naski tunatotlane kalwogo anijalage juniyawi. Ani wahya, ani sahoni, ani gelohi, ani wodi, ani jiskwa, ani kawi, ale ani godegewi. Hea kalwogi yunadalki unaniki se uhyatla idila dunuktane. Ani na dawigi aneha uhyatla kalaga naskano no kwichiki amayetli. Hea ani jalagi aneha nunadana ani na dawigi ilatla igohi da kila unaniki se. Dunuktane uganawa ale kalaga nana dunuktane. Dani nele digaduha ale diskadugi ale jalakayeli nuistane.
I have always been fascinated by the story of human evolution and the peopling of the earth. And one of the things I truly enjoy about the subject is that new discoveries are made every year that force us to tweak or even rewrite parts of the story. Paleontologists and archaeologists unearth new fossils and artifacts that reset timelines, locations, and relationships among the early hominids and their descendants. Geneticists identify ancient segments in our modern DNA that reveal a deeper connection to Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other human species that did not become modern humans, painting a portrait of a much more diverse and less linear evolution within the human family than was ever believed. The current story that science tells is that after several million years of Australopithecine evolution in Africa, the first humans of our genus Homo emerged around 2.8 million years ago with Homo habilis. Then, sometime around 400,000 years ago, Homo sapiens and our cousins Homo neanderthalensis evolved. And from mitochondrial DNA, we can even trace all living humans to a common female ancestor who lived in East Africa around 155,000 years ago, known as the matrilineal most recent common ancestor, who is sometimes called the mitochondrial Eve. It may disturb some people these days who choose to deny their common humanity based on any number of meaningless distinctions, but we can't escape the fundamental biological heritage we all share. But we didn't stay in Africa for long, of course. As early as 300,000 years ago, it is believed humans began to disperse across Eurasia in successive waves. The so-called recent African origin model, based on DNA and fossil evidence, suggests that modern humans began to spread out in earnest around 70,000 years ago, and by 50,000 years ago, humans had reached Australia and sometime later North and South America. Until recent decades, the working theory was that the first people to reach the Americas arrived near the end of the last glacial maximum around 14,000 years ago by crossing the Bering Sea from Asia during a period when the sea level was low. But recent discoveries are pointing to a much earlier date, possibly as early as 40,000 years ago. One example that was only announced in the news last month is the discovery of preserved human footprints in New Mexico that can be positively dated to between 23,000 and 21,000 years ago. To have reached as far south as New Mexico supports the theory that people arrived in North and South America much earlier to have reached that far south by such a date. These amazing scientific discoveries are rewriting our knowledge of human evolution, and especially the story of the ancestors of Native Americans. But our scientific efforts to understand human origins is a relatively recent development in the long story of our species. Questions about where we came from, why we are here, why there is death and evil in the world, are all big cosmic questions that have been with us ever since humans became self-aware. It is easy to imagine our ancient ancestors staring in awe and wonder at the night sky, or watching the miracle of childbirth, and then sitting around the fire at night sharing thoughts and stories about our origins and our understanding of the world. Looking around at the natural world, at the many plants and animals that shared the earth with us, they pondered their relationships and why they were different from human beings. Were they people too? Have they always been with us? Was there a time long ago when we could speak each other's language? When we must kill them for food, how do they feel about it? Then looking across the vast landscapes, deserts, mountains, canyons, grasslands, and great bodies of water, and the sun and the moon and the stars, they thought about even bigger questions about where it all came from and what powers and spirits must be responsible for bringing it into being. Seeing the cycles of birth, life, and death, they wondered if this was the only world, or were there perhaps other worlds where the ancestors now lived. Suffering and death were clearly evident, but was death the end of who we are? Among every family group, tribe, and culture that emerged around the planet, making sense of the world and finding meaning in life demanded that such questions be considered. Over time, within a culture, an overarching origin story developed, a cosmogonic myth in theological terms, a story that attempted to answer the big questions, a story that could be passed from generation to generation, preserving the wisdom of the community. Some of these stories, like the Judeo-Christian myth in Genesis, became enshrined in the great religious traditions that emerged, spreading from humble origins into the beliefs of millions, even billions of people. And though they were believed to be what we would call factually true within certain communities at times, we can now easily disprove the factual truth of these creation myths through the lens of science. Sure, there are still some who reject the science and cling to the myth, but such beliefs are seen as increasingly absurd to most reasonable people. It is unfortunate that some people cannot appreciate their own sacred creation stories as mythic, poetic truth out of fear that their whole religious worldview will come crashing down like a house of cards. It is also unfortunate that some people dismiss such creation myths as silly superstition without exploring the mythic truths that we can glean from them. This morning, I chose 6 Native American origin stories to share and explore. The first 2 were creation myths from the Ojibwe and Haudenosaunee tribes that told different versions of the story of Sky Woman and Turtle Island. The Ojibwe people are an Algonquin-speaking tribe that seems to have consolidated its present identity in the early 1600s. They have historically lived around the Great Lakes in what is now southern Canada and the northern Midwestern states. But from oral histories, they're believed to have originally inhabited an area near the Atlantic coast in modern Quebec before beginning a series of migrations to the west. Having originally lived farther east, it is not surprising that the Ojibwe would share a similar cosmology that includes Sky Woman and Turtle Island with the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois whose famous Confederation of Six Nations lived in a large area of the northeastern U.S. and parts of Ontario and Quebec, stretching from the Ohio Valley to the St. Lawrence River. Both tribes were undoubtedly in contact for centuries, and both are native to the northern forest ecosystem that extends across the northern United States and southern Canada from the Atlantic to the Great Plains. They knew the same plants and animals, hunted, gathered, and farmed the same food, and probably shared a common Paleo-Indian ancestry. Their shared creation story of Turtle Island is common to many tribes, though as you saw in the two versions this morning, the details and characters in the story vary. Sky Woman either decides to descend or falls to the earth, then she lands on the back of a giant turtle, and the water creatures assist in bringing mud from the depths to create the land. She then populates the world with plants and animals, and the first people, the ancestors of the tribe telling the story. It is believed that the idea of Turtle Island was inspired by seeing islands in the many lakes and rivers they encountered, and by observing snapping turtles emerging from hibernation. Snapping turtles bury themselves in several inches of mud to hibernate, and by the time they emerge, there are often grasses and other plants growing on top of a thick mud layer on their shells. It is easy to see how such an unusual sight could be imagined on a much larger scale to explain the land under our feet. It is also interesting to see which animals become the heroes of the story, and it likely says something about their relative importance to the tribe. The way the animals interact is sometimes surprising, but one can easily see natural animal behaviors in the stories that indicate generations of close observation. The Cherokee, for example, tell a similar story of mud being brought to the surface of a water-covered earth, but in their version, there is no turtle, and the lowly water beetle is the one who can dive deep enough to find soil. I chose the next two stories from the Hopi and Inuit peoples to illustrate the importance of local geographical and cultural influences. For the Hopi, who inhabited the dry, rocky landscape of the desert Southwest, a land filled with canyons and caverns, their origin story began with emergence from an underground world and instructions from the spirit Masa, the skeleton man, who was the guardian of the underworld. With their proximity to Mexico and Central America, it is easy to see echoes of Mesoamerican spirituality centered on the underworld. The importance of ceremonial centers like Chaco Canyon in New Mexico also suggests a deep southwestern emphasis on gathering at specific geographic sites for ceremonies to mark celestial and other significant events. The Inuit people, who inhabit the harsh Arctic region from Alaska all the way to Greenland, tell the story that centers on Raven and the creation of animals that are important to their lives. It speaks of mountain sheep, fish, and other creatures that are necessary for surviving in such a cold climate with scarce vegetation. And even the polar bear, which was critical to instill a healthy dose of fear and humility in humankind. It also explains why hunting and gathering was so difficult, because if it was too easy, humans would eat everything too quickly and decimate the wild populations. Raven, who they believed to have been created by a divine spirit, is central to Inuit religion. Raven is often a shapeshifter or trickster character in their mythology, who is not always a source of good. The most surprising part of the Inuit creation story for me was the emergence of the first man from a pea pod. It's easy to see how a pea and a pod could be compared to a human child in the womb, but it wasn't until I did some research that I learned that wild peas, such as the beach pea, do indeed grow in the Arctic and Nordic regions. Peas are in fact one of the oldest known cultivated crops because they are so ubiquitous. The last two stories were chosen for different reasons. I included the Navajo origin story to demonstrate the wonderful diversity of Native American religion. with its multiple worlds, water monsters, evil cat people, and coyotes' troublemaking, it is a wild and interesting tale. And as with the Hopi story, there are echoes of Mesoamerican spirituality in the underworld emergence of the first people. My favorite part of the story was how coyotes' naughty thieving ruined the nicer third world, and the acknowledgement that the harsh southwestern landscape that the Navajo now inhabit was, quote, not as beautiful as the third world. Perhaps having seen more verdant landscapes in their journeys, this reflected a bit of envy, or at least an explanation for why the Navajo land was a less hospitable environment. The last story is not a creation myth per se, but describes the origin of the Cherokee people as a tribe in what is now the southeastern United States. The Cherokee also have origin stories about how the mountainous landscape of the southern Appalachians was formed before the people arrived. The fascinating parts of this story are their descriptions of the first coming from an island tormented by earthquakes and volcanoes before a long and perilous ocean voyage to the American mainland. Then they tell of living among the Haudenosaunee, or Iroquois, for a time before settling in their southeastern homeland. While no definitive evidence to support the island origin story has yet been discovered, the Cherokee language is the last remaining southern Iroquoian language still spoken today. So the time among the Iroquois, or at least a differentiation of the tribe from another Iroquois group, is almost certain. The people who first identified as Cherokee appear to have established a presence in the southeastern United States sometime after the Spanish contact with the large Mississippian culture that dominated the region as late as the early 16th century and before the 18th century. Like many Native American myths, there are clues in these ancient oral traditions that add to the growing body of anthropological evidence. It is unfortunate that so many of these stories have been lost to history due to European colonialism. These origin stories point to a rich diversity of spirituality among the hundreds of tribes that once inhabited the Americas for thousands of years before European contact. Though we typically celebrate the earth-centered spirituality of indigenous people in general, there was no singular worldview in their response to the big cosmic questions. Why should we expect this to be the case in such a vast geographical area as North and South America, with such a vast variety of ecosystems? And as the evidence is beginning to affirm waves of migration from Asia and possibly Europe over the span of tens of thousands of years, it seems even more likely that the spirituality and culture of the First Nations would be more diverse than we might have imagined. There's much to explore in these creation stories and the many other stories Native Americans can offer. They can help us better understand the unique bioregions of our land and offer guidance for managing our relationship with the many plants and animals. They can help us appreciate our interdependence with all the creatures of the world. Through their poetry and mythic truths, we may deepen our knowledge of the human spiritual journey and supplement our scientific understanding of where we came from and the people who were here before us. Let us not trivialize these stories, nor let us embrace them without learning more about the people and culture from whence they came. These are stories with ancient roots, and if we are open to listening, they have much to teach us. I invite you to join now in our closing hymn, number 323, Break Not the Circle.
Break not the circle of enabling love, where people grow forgiven and forgiving.
Our closing words are from a Sioux prayer from the book Earth Prayers. Grandfather, Great Spirit, all over the world the faces of the living ones are alike. With tenderness they have come up out of the ground. Look upon your children, that they may face the winds and walk the good road to the day of quiet. Grandfather, Great Spirit, fill us with light. Give us the strength to understand and the eyes to see. Teach us to walk the soft earth as relatives to all that live. Before I extinguish the chalice this morning, I'll remind you that we will have a brief virtual coffee hour after the service at the link provided. Please join me in reading the words to extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.